The instant buddy flag is on the
I can use another one of those if you really want it. You don't have to sneak it off the table. We freely share it.
I want you to be able to use my pen this way. Just give it back to me. Just a second. I'm letting him write all the notes. Can you see how I write? Can you see my writing?
Okay, we're moving into our last segment, and I would just suggest to you that I think it's the most important segment because viruses will always be with us, and the question is not so much how do we destroy the virus, it is how do we strengthen the organism so it naturally resists the virus. So antagonism is real. But it does tremendous damage to some systems, and other systems seem to remain relatively unscathed. And I think it has primarily to do with the health of the system. So when we're asking about strengthening the organism, I just want to be clear, it's not just the congregational level that we're talking about, it's also the district level and the conference level. So we're interested in how do we strengthen the entire organism so that we can successfully resist destructive viruses from wherever they come. For me, that would include destructive level 5 conflict, whether an antagonist is involved or not. How do we deal with conflict when it's small rather than large? And if we do, God forbid, end up with a true antagonist in the midst, how do we deal with him or her in ways that leaves the system relatively unscathed, even though damage will still occur? So the three of us are going to address some thoughts that we have on it. I'm going to record as Don and Susan share, and then maybe Susan, if you could record as I share, but we'll get to that. And then we're going to open it up for a general discussion on strengthening the organism. So we decided not to be prescriptive about this. We're going to offer some thoughts, and then we'd like to hear your thoughts. Don.
When I think about strengthening the organism, I immediately go to what is the source of our strength? What is the source of our power? And that is that I think one of the main ways, maybe the main way that we strengthen the organism is by making sure that we're kind of prayed up, if you will, that we are keeping our prayer life active. And I mean that on 2 or 3 different levels. I certainly mean particularly for the clergy, those who are in positions of leadership. They need that's an issue of self-care. They need to be paying attention to their devotional life. When we do exit interviews of people who are leaving the ministry, almost every one of them will be a comment about, well, I kind of lost my devotional life along the way. I don't do that anymore. But also the church as a whole to be focused on praying for one another. And I'm not really talking about so much. I mean, at Wednesday night dinner, we stand up and we call out the names of the people that we're concerned about and who's in the hospital and all that. But I'm just talking about praying for one another as a group, as the body of Christ, or praying for situations. And that power of prayer does amazing things when it's in order to strengthen that system. I think another thing is that when we are a high expectation church, we are much less likely to be affected by somebody who's got a complaint or who is wanting to stir things up. And by high expectations, a couple of things. One is that there's a kind of a low tolerance for bad behavior. That we don't talk like that around here. If somebody kind of blurts out things in a meeting that are unkind, or they are attacking somebody versus talking about the situation, but attacking somebody's character, it's appropriate in a high expectation church that somebody would come up and say, we don't do that around here, or that's not how we need to be talking to one another. And that's not being unkind, that's not being pushy or whatever. That's just how we do things in this church. High expectation churches have much less difficulty with these things. Now, it's not going to be none of these things are going to kind of be perfect in protecting you from this, but in terms of what they do to develop your immune system, if you will, they are very effective. And that kind of picking up on another aspect of that, I think it's okay. I think we ought to encourage people to speak up when we see bullying going on. And maybe that's somebody who's acting like they're bullying the pastor, or maybe that's somebody bullying somebody else in a meeting, committee meeting, or at church in some way. When we step up and speak about that, it makes bullies back down. Bullies back down from strong people. It's very clear that they are committed to their church. I think another way that we strengthen the immune system is that we pay attention to how we fill leadership positions. If we do our due diligence, if we actually run the nominations committee, leadership committee, the way it probably ought to be run, we're kind of working on that all year long, aren't we? We're kind of keeping a list of people that we see that look like they've got some skills, or they've got an interest, or they've got a spirit that could be useful. One thing I know, I'm sure you all aren't guilty of this, but I've been guilty of that. The nominations committee meets one time a year. It meets in August. We kind of get all together. We kind of fill out the blank and we hand it in. Charge conference, all done. Probably not a great plan. If we can kind of do some preparation, and we can think about this and choose people, and just think about this. This has to do also with the fact that we're really reticent to roll people off of these committees. People can be the committee chair for 14 years, and the fact that they are still aggravating us or creating difficulties in the church, well, it's okay. They've always been the church treasurer, and we should just kind of get used to the fact that they're afraid to show us the checkbook. And this is not as unusual as it sounds, sadly. The other way that we could do work that strengthens our immune system is that we do a good job in how we hire people. And we've all had the experience of, we have an empty spot, whether it's a youth director, music, some kind of staff position, and somebody's son, daughter, aunt, whatever, just happens to be out of a job and looking for something. And, well, wouldn't it be great if we could help out so-and-so? We've all been there. We've all made that mistake. But when we do a good job of watching, just kind of thinking about, very carefully about how we fill those positions, that really does strengthen the life of the church, strengthen the network of people being able to work together and to be much less vulnerable to bullying and antagonists. And next to the last thing is, I think that celebratory churches do a better job they have a higher immune system, stronger immune system. When a church is celebrating the things that happen, sometimes they're celebrating the little things, sometimes they're really big things, but it's kind of hard for somebody to be talking negative about stuff when what we're doing is we're just rejoicing at how the church is reaching out in the community, how the church is taking care of this family or that family, or how we are responding to a need somewhere. That's kind of a small thing, but I think it really works very well. And the other thing is, and this is something that's come out of my work with this project. This originally was something that had to do with working just with clergy. But the more that we got into this, the more that we studied it, the more reading that we did, it was clear that we were making a big mistake if there weren't at least as many lay people in this room as there are clergy people. And it is that teamwork which I believe strengthens the immune system. When we are able to develop those team relationships, when there's in those situations, when something happens, you immediately have somebody that you can call to say, we need to talk. And that is a very rich resource, and I would I would just encourage you to move in that direction to the best extent that you can. And there are churches that's kind of hard to do sometimes. There have been times in the life of our church where we get real divided, and it's hard to have that sense of teamwork. But in terms of a goal to build up our immune system, that's I think it's crucial. That's what I got.
Excellent. The importance of prayer, individual and corporate, of setting high expectations, of naming unhelpful or bullying behaviors, selecting leaders and hiring with care, creating a culture of celebration, and forming a team. Susan, I hope you and I have something to add to that.
So, as a layperson, I think I wanted to say, I know this isn't universal, but that it's really good if pastors, for example, and congregants can see conflict as not necessarily binary, good or bad, and especially if you go to a pastor about something that may not be working well, that if they tend to tense up right away, it really stifles things. So I wish there was more training in seminary, frankly, on conflict, and that it can be, if anybody ever tells you it's an either-or situation, no, it's not. There's often stuff in between that we really need to be aware, because then we can be more creative about what we want to do about a problem. So I hope that we can not get into that either-or scenario with it. And to be more creative. So I would like there to be more comfort level about that. The other thing, I was going to elaborate a little where Don said naming unhelpful behaviors. So I was at a workshop this summer, but actually it was not this summer, it was in November, and it was on trauma. And in the morning we had 4 hours of lecture about torture by someone who's internationally known for this, and it was an excellent series, but there was no processing of it afterward. And so when we got to the afternoon session in our smaller groups, 2 of us gave presentations, and we were both sort of attacked in that presentation, even though we had done our guidelines the day before about being respectful and being considerate. And then after that we went into an afternoon on a lecture on spiritual behavior and spiritual growth, and that how that relates to trauma. Well, what happened was that person got attacked too, and And so I thought about it overnight, and my roommate said, you probably just need to give it up. And I thought, but no, if we don't change this, it can happen to other people. So I went in the next day, and I used this formula that somebody else had taught me, and it really worked well. But it's you say what you observe, what behavior do you observe, and then say how you feel about it. And then if you say what meaning you make of it and what action you take. And so I told them, I said, I felt good about doing this at first, but then it felt like I couldn't, it felt like after 15 minutes when I did my presentation, all of you kind of turned in a different way, and I didn't get anything from it, and I got very defensive and felt like I didn't learn from you as I wanted to. I had been excited to present to you, and now I'm not. And then I said that, so I felt kind of attacked, and then I said that the meaning I make of it is that we've violated our guidelines, and that we were probably affected by that torture lecture that went on before and never got processed, and that I'd seen it gone on in the afternoon after our session as well, and that I think we needed to revisit our guidelines and let's do them better. And we have been the best group since then, and we have stayed in touch online because we have to weigh in every week on different topics and different projects, and it has made a whopping difference. But that how you say it, and it took me a night to figure out how to say it without being too emotional or losing it, but it really did help all of us, I hope, and I think, and so I wanted to keep that in.
So say what you observe,
what meaning you make of it, and then what action you think should come from it, you propose. And so, yeah, those are my things.
So I want to capture that last piece in a phrase, if I can. It sounds a bit like naming what you see, but in a little bit different way than naming unhelpful or bullying behaviors. Can you give me a phrase as to how you would express that?
I'm trying to think. It's sort of just a calm way of saying, here's what we're doing, and here's what we can grow into or live into that's different.
So you're making an observation, but challenging the group to its higher self,
yes,
if you will.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. What I observe or hear, what I feel about it, and then the third thing is what meaning do I make of it? And my meaning was how we had the session that morning that had been unprocessed, and that we had guidelines we had not followed. And then the final thing was what action do we want to take, which was basically to live into our guidelines and to be helpful to each other, which we had promised we would do. So it was, yeah.
Excellent. So I had come prepared to make 5 observations, and 3 of them have been made. So I'm going to ask if you would be willing to record, Susan, for a couple of new ones. The 2 that I would most add to this, and then I'll highlight a couple of others, are if you don't have one, develop a behavioral covenant with your congregation. There is an excellent book by Gil Rendell, R-E-N-D-L-E, on behavioral covenants for congregations. I use them with every leadership group that I work with, and I do it illustratively, so it's not like I come and say, okay, these are the ground rules, you have to abide by them. But develop a behavioral covenant. How are we going to be with each other? Starting with your leadership team or your council, but ultimately pulling the congregation into that. If you have an existing behavioral covenant that people understand and have committed to, then it's much easier to call people out on unhelpful behaviors because they know what they have established. So let me just put the Rendell, R-E-N-D-L-E. If you Google behavioral covenants for congregations and Gil Rendell's name, it's easily available on Amazon or anywhere else. It's a fairly simple, straightforward book. And I would just be curious, how many of you have some kind of behavioral covenant, at least with your leadership team, council? Have any of you developed that as a congregation? With staff? Excellent. You've got to start somewhere. But if you don't have a behavioral covenant, if you don't have some shared norms of how to interact, it's actually much more difficult to call people out on their behavior because they'll just assume that you don't operate the same way I do, you're just picking on me. Yes?
You said R-E-N-D.
DLE, I believe. Yeah, DLE. Rendell. Former Albany Institute consultant, but he's helped a lot of congregations as a VI develop behavioral covenants, and I think it's really helpful. The second thing I would add is to clarify your lines of authority. Authority really matters when it comes to dealing with individuals who are behaving in this way, the true antagonists. And if there's fuzziness about who has authority and where it lies, that is very fertile ground for antagonists and antagonistic behavior. If there's clarity about authority and lines of authority, who has it, what their scope of authority is, and whenever there's authority, there also needs to be accountability. So what authority do I have? To whom am I accountable? But we can use that clarity to deal with unhelpful behavior, and particularly with true antagonists. So clarify lines of authority, and if I could just add to that, and policies and procedures that might have to deal with unhelpful, destructive behavior in the congregation. So when it comes to conflict in general, and antagonism in particular, fuzziness is our enemy, and clarity is our friend. If we're fuzzy about who has authority and who has the right to exercise it, that is incredibly fertile ground for antagonistic behavior. If we're clear about it, who has authority and how it can be exercised, that actually is one of the best antidotes that we have to the virus of destructive behaviors. So those are the two I would add. The other three that I was thinking of, but they were mentioned, it is important then to name unhelpful or bullying behaviors. It's very important to work as a team, as we said earlier, to never try this alone, but to form a team with lay and clergy. And high expectations, which is Tom Rainier's major finding, as you mentioned, that instead of, anything goes in this church, you know, come as you are, Jesus loves us all as we are, which is absolutely true, but that doesn't mean that we should behave however we want to in a congregation. Jesus loves us as we are and is wanting us to be transformed, and we do that in the context of Rainier's finding. High expectation churches are growing, low expectation churches are shrinking. It's really kind of interesting. People want high expectations. Okay, that was what we had planned to present, thoughts from the three of us. But again, we want to be elicitive, not just prescriptive. So I'm going to invite you into some short table conversation, and then we'd really appreciate some feedback if there are some of these you want to affirm in terms of how to strengthen your congregation, how to strengthen your district, how to strengthen your conference. If there are things that you think we're missing and specific questions that you have for application, we'd welcome that. With any luck, we might be out of here before 5 o'clock. So, but take about 10 minutes to talk about around your table, what of these would you affirm? What's missing? What questions do you have? How might we go about truly strengthening the organism? And then we'll check back in with you at about 1:15.